pursuant to adjournment. All having business before this honorable court, draw near, give attention, and you shall be heard. You may be seated. Parties who are to give testimony in these proceedings, please step to the front. Please raise your right hand. You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and your testimony will comply with the rules of the Ohio mock trial competition. I do. You may be seated.
I'd like to begin by introducing the members of the court to you. On my far right, on your left, is James Phillips, who is a member of the board of OCLRE, or House Center for Law-Related Education, been a long-time member and supporter of the program. On my immediate right is the president of the Ohio State Bar Association, Steve Chapelier. On my immediate left is Dan Hilson, who is the president of the board of the Ohio Center for Law-Related Education. And on my far left, on your right, is Brett Kravitz, who is representing Attorney General James Petro. Petitioners, are you ready to begin? Respondents, are you ready to begin?
Yes, Your Honor.
Petitioners, you may begin with an opening statement.
Thanks, Your Honor.
Mr. Butler.
Good afternoon, Your Honors. My name is Shane Butler, counsel for Petitioner Landon P. Miller. I would like to start by introducing my co-counsel, Adam Clark Joseph. I would also like to introduce the two witnesses we will be calling today. First, Landon Miller, played by Andy Trafford, and Benjamin Zachary, played by Ben Adams. May it please the court, there is no dispute that treason is an intolerable offense, but it is also certain that the denial of fundamental constitutional rights is, if not treasonous per se, equally intolerable. Landon Miller did not commit treason, but the Army officers who, with guns drawn, rousted him from his bed and arrested him for legitimately exercising his First Amendment rights, and the military tribunal, who tried him in a single day and sentenced him to a life of imprisonment, clearly violated his constitutional rights. That is why we are before you today, seeking the immediate release of Landon Miller, pursuant to a writ of habeas corpus as provided for in the Constitution. More specifically, we're here because, as the evidence will show, the government acting through its military violated several of the most important constitutional protections. Among them, the First Amendment's guarantee to freedom of speech, the Fifth Amendment's guarantee that charges be made by means of a grand jury indictment, not the whim of a military officer, and the Sixth Amendment's guarantee to a speedy and public trial by jury of the state and district where the crime allegedly was committed. Moreover, it is clear that the military tribunal that prosecuted Mr. Miller lacked any jurisdiction to hear and decide the charges against him. Mr. Miller will testify as a witness on his own behalf. From him, you will learn that he, a private citizen and farmer who the government accuses of treason, served in the very army that arrested him and suffered grievous wounds in defense of the Union. You will learn that Mr. Miller loves his country. His war experiences left him with a great aversion to any kind of military activity, and certainly any activity such as the overthrow of the government he served. Mr. Miller will look you in the eye and tell you he is not a traitor. You will learn the specific act which led to his arrest and sentence to a life of imprisonment was nothing more than remarks made in response to a question about the Democratic Convention which Mr. Miller attended. Remarks made casually during a gathering of men, women, and children alike held at his residence to celebrate the bountiful harvest. You will hear from both Mr. Miller and from his neighbor, another Ohio farmer, Mr. Benjamin Zachary, that the remarks Mr. Miller made were quite clearly not the venomous statements that the government claims, that nothing was said to incite an illegal overthrow of the government. It won't be denied that the remarks that so offended the military were political in nature, that they were partial to the Democratic Party and critical of the Republican Party. But it is an election year, and discussion of the policies of the two main parties in an election year is not only to be expected, but is essential to our democracy and is thus protected by the guarantees of the First Amendment. Mr. Miller also won't deny that he was a member of the Sons of Liberty, But both he and Mr. Zachary will absolutely deny that the order had any illegitimate purpose. The primary purpose of the order was simply to aid the Democratic Party in its effort to elect a Democrat in the upcoming presidential election. Before concluding, let me make one observation about a witness you will hear testify for the respondent. By calling FD Stiger, the government shows just how low it will stoop to try and uphold the illegitimate, draconian judgments of its military tribunal. Ms. Stiger is a scoundrel of the first order. She is a woman who hunted escaped slaves with dogs, and a woman who failed to earn respect from even the people whose slaves she returned. The evidence will show that Ms. Stiger is a paid informant with but one aim: to please the general who hired her in the hope of getting a good job after the war. In short, the evidence will show clearly and convincingly that the military tribunal had no jurisdiction to hear and decide the charges against Mr. Miller, and that his rights under the First, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment were trampled by the Army officers who broke down his door and arrested him. For these reasons, the writ should be granted and Mr. Miller released. Our nation is engaged in a great war to save the Union, but we ask this court to consider whether that Union is worth saving if in the process the rights that it is to guarantee are lost. Only by freeing the petitioner can the rights of every American be secured. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. I should advise counsel that we're going to pause just briefly after each presentation so that the judges can score more accurately than waiting until we're finished. Counsel for respondents, do you have a
Yes,
statement? Okay, Ms. Riesenberg.
Good afternoon, Your Honors. I'm Katie Riestenberg, counsel for the respondent. This is my co-counsel, Seth Reddy. Casey Munn will be playing JJ Bingham this afternoon, and Sarah Weeman will be playing FD Stiger. May it please the court. We as citizens of the state of Ohio are part of the United States of America. We live by the words spoken by President Lincoln at Gettysburg nearly 1 year ago. He said, "Our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal." Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Unfortunately, there are those in our society that hold us back from the unity that President Lincoln spoke of at Gettysburg. There are cells of rebellion in Ohio. There are Confederate supporters in Howdy County. And if we nurture their existence, Your Honors, this nation will not endure. As today's testimony will reveal, the petitioner Landon P. Miller held a gathering at his farm on September 25th, 1864. The evidence will show that at some point during the meeting, he implored his crowd to resist the war and express support for Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president. He had the support of those in attendance at this gathering, who cheered his comments. On October 2nd, Mr. Miller was arrested by order of General Burnside on the charges of inciting an insurrection in violation of the laws of war. On October 24th, he was tried before a military commission. He was convicted and is being held in prison. On October 31st, Mr. Miller filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus, seeking his release. Your Honors, we, the respondent, will show three things for today's trial. First, Mr. Miller's words and actions leading to his arrest were outside his First Amendment rights to freedom of speech and peaceful assembly. Second, the military commission had the right to hear the case immediately. And third, the commission had the right to detain the petitioner in custody. Through the employment of stipulated Exhibit A, a flyer advertising Mr. Miller's gathering, you will see that he pre-planned to have an anti-war rally in his horse barn where the treasonous action took place. We, the respondent, will depict for you the scene in Miller's horse barn that evening. The evidence will show that members of the Order of the Sons of Liberty were attending. Testimony by FD Stiger will show that the Sons of Liberty have engaged in rebellious activity before, hiding in the underbelly of the National Democratic Party. Using stipulated Exhibit C, a gun shipment receipt, you will see that nearly 2,800 guns were delivered to Miller's farm the day of the gathering. The evidence will show that the petitioner then proceeded to deliver an inflammatory oration to his crowd in support of Confederate ambitions and the Confederate president. jeopardizing the safety of our community. JJ Bingham, a friend and fellow Democrat of the petitioner, will testify to being so taken aback by these dangerous remarks that he had to gather his family and leave the petitioner's farm. Your Honors, I remind you that the petitioner had the burden of proving through clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Miller's words and actions were not treasonous. The petitioner has already been given a trial. He has already been convicted. We, the respondent, respectfully ask that the writ of habeas corpus be denied. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Riesenberg. Petitioner, you may call your first witness.
Petitioner calls Landon Miller instead. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and current occupation for the record?
My name's Landon P. Miller, and I'm a farmer. I own a farm in Howdy County, Ohio.
And when, sir, did you begin working on the said farm in Howdy County?
I was born in Kentucky, and I left Kentucky in '62 to take care of my sick uncle, who owned a farm in Howdy County at the time.
So, have you remained in Howdy County since '62?
No, later in the year I was drafted and responded to the Enrollment Act and saw service in the Union Army.
Could you please describe your military service for this court?
Certainly. On '63, I saw service under Generals Grant and Sherman in camps in Tennessee and Mississippi. But then I was grievously wounded in a skirmish.
So, how did your military service end?
Well, I was discharged as a result of my grievous wounds.
And what did you do after leaving the military?
Well, I learned earlier in the summer that my uncle had passed away. And because I did such a good job taking care of him when he was sick, he left his farm in Howdy County with me. So I returned to Howdy County and began working on my newly acquired farm.
Now, Mr. Miller, are you loyal to your country?
Objection, Your Honor. This is an improper opinion question.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Sure.
I do not believe that this calls for an opinion. Whether or not Mr. Miller is loyal to his country is something to which Mr. Miller can directly testify. It's one of the few things he can have absolute knowledge of.
Objections overruled. He can testify as to his own feelings.
Would you like me to repeat the question, Mr. Miller?
No, sir. Of course I'm loyal to my country. I love my country. When called to military duty, I answered. Similarly, I agree with my fellow Kentuckians that invasion of the Commonwealth had to be resisted. So if our governor had issued a call to arms, I no doubt would have responded.
So, Mr. Miller, what is your opinion of the war in which our country is now embroiled?
Well, because I love my country, I can say this. I harbor strong doubts about the wisdom of fighting and the probability of success for either side. I mean, if you look around you, all you see are unsown fields and fatherless brood, churches full of tearful women and questioning men.
Do you know if others in Howdy County shared your views?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation?
First of all, Your Honor, I'm asking whether or not he knows if others in Howdy County shared his view. Hence, he should be able to say either yes, he does know they shared his view, or no, he does not know if they shared his view. I'm not calling for a direct
I'll
speculation.
allow the question, but you'll need to tie it into how he knows that.
I will, Your Honor.
Thank you.
So, do you know if others in Howdy County shared your views?
Yes, I do. I spent a lot of time talking with members of Howdy County, and I learned their views very easily.
And what did you learn of their views?
Well, I learned that they agreed with me on the war. For example, JJ Bingham, editor of the Howdy County Weekly Press. Him and I became very good friends as we discussed the war, and he agreed with me. He introduced me to other people who had similar opinions, and these people were members of the Order of the Sons of Liberty, or the Order, as I call it.
Objection, Your Honor. I move to strike his testimony about JJ Bingham and his views as speculation.
Counsel?
Your Honor, I don't believe that's speculation on Mr. Miller's part. He had direct contact with Mr. Bingham, and he should have a reasonable understanding of what Mr. Bingham's attitudes were.
Objections overruled.
Thank you.
So, you mentioned this order. Could you please explain your involvement with that?
Certainly, given my interest in politics, they were political orders, so I thought it would be a good idea to join them. See, my opinion is that it's in the best interest of the nation that the Democratic Party regain power in Washington. Members of the order agreed with me, so I did not hesitate to join. And I have become a leading member. In fact, someone in a more national position bestowed the title of general upon me but that was just a jab from my time on the front lines. Frankly, such military talk scares me.
So, Mr. Miller, could you please explain the activities of the order in which you participated?
Certainly, mostly we met and talked and discussed how to get the White House back. Earlier this year, I was nominated to go to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Some of the members have discussed marching and drilling, but I've seen enough of the real thing to know that it's much better to concern yourself with politics.
So, as a leading member of the order, a general, their nominee to the Democratic National Convention, were you aware of any violent activities undertaken by the order?
Well, no activities, but I've heard all sorts of schemes, which you're bound to hear every which way, especially with the war going on. All of them are just scuttlebutt anyway. The order never intended to use force to harm our government. While those views may have been held by a few extreme individuals, they were certainly not held by the majority of us.
Now, on a slightly different subject, Mr. Miller, what, if anything, did you do after returning home from the Democratic National Convention?
Yes, sir. Well, I decided it would be a good time to have a harvest celebration at my farm. I know I had plenty of space to have it. And it was September, and I knew it was going to be a bountiful crop. So I decided that it would give everyone a chance to celebrate what was at stake in the upcoming election and why we had worked so hard.
Did you generate any sort of publicity for this gathering?
Certainly, far from being this secret political meeting the government seems to label it as, I wanted everyone in Howard County to come. So I made a flyer and posted it all around Howard County.
Your Honor, permission to approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Let the record reflect that I'm showing opposing counsel an unmarked copy of what was previously stipulated as Exhibit A.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller, could you please identify the item which I've just handed you?
This is the flyer that I posted around Howard County.
And could you please read the large, bold-faced title at the top?
It says, "Celebrate the Bountiful Harvest."
Objection, Your Honor. The exhibit speaks for itself.
Counsel, what's your purpose in having him read the exhibit? Is there a purpose for him reading the exhibit to us?
Your Honor, I don't believe it does speak for itself. I think it's necessary to get that on the record as
Okay, I'd ask you to limit your questions as to what's on that exhibit.
certainly
because
that
we
was
can
my
read it.
last.
Unless there's something in it that you want to emphasize, but otherwise, we can read it.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Now, could you please describe this gathering and your actions there?
Certainly. 25th is a beautiful day, much like it is outside right now. So a lot of people came, and there was a lot of fun and food, activities. The little ones were running around playing games. I know I had plenty of room to do that. But naturally, there was political talk, which you can't escape when you gather people during an election year. So given my interest in politics, I joined in.
And what exactly did you say, Mr. Miller?
Well, one of the men present, Dr. Bowles, asked me what I had learned at the Democratic National Convention. So I told him that the Democratic Party had presented a peace plan intended to end the bloodshed. I also told him that I thought the Army draft was not sound policy, but nothing that I said was this treasonous venom of which the government accused me.
So, how would you have characterized the outcome of this gathering immediately afterwards?
Oh, it was a big success. Incidentally, a lot of people learned about the true stance of the order.
So, what, if anything, happened on October 2nd?
Well, I woke to the sound of Union soldiers breaking down my door with their guns drawn and ordering me to get dressed.
And what, if anything, did the soldiers do at that point?
They tied my hands, threw me in the back of a wagon, and detained me at the penitentiary of Columbus ever since.
Would you please explain what happened while you were detained in the penitentiary?
On October 24th, I was brought before a military commission on charges of inciting insurrection on my farm.
And how long did this hearing before this military commission last?
Just one day.
What was the outcome of this hearing?
On one day, they sentenced me to spend the rest of my life in prison.
So was your trial in this matter a trial in the federal district court?
No, it was not.
And was your trial in this matter a trial before a jury of your peers?
No, it was not.
Were you ever granted a grand jury indictment in this matter?
No, I was not.
Now, I have just one last question, Mr. Miller. Are you a traitor to your country?
I'm not a traitor to my country. Never have been, never will be. I love my country.
Objection, Your Honor. I move to strike this testimony. This is what we're here today to decide. He cannot testify to that.
May I respond, Your Honor? If this is what you're here today to decide, I believe his testimony to that effect is necessarily pertinent.
Yes, he may give his opinion of whether or not he's a traitor. Objections overruled.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Clark Joseph. Ms. Riesenberg, do you wish to cross-examine the witness?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
Okay, you may.
Mr. Miller, Jefferson Davis is the one president and statesman you admire above all other. Isn't that true?
Objection, Your Honor. This question is irrelevant to the matter at hand. It
Your Honor.
has a direct bearing on Mr. Miller's, the constitutionality of Mr. Miller's opinion.
Your Honor, if I may respond, this could not be more relevant. He's charged with treason. He's charged with supporting the Confederacy, and Jefferson Davis is the president of this Confederacy.
Objection to rule.
Thank you. Jefferson Davis is the one president and statesman that you admire above all others. Isn't that true, Mr. Miller?
I admire any man that will uphold his ideals in the face of adversity, regardless of whether they're right or wrong.
And you're a Democrat, though, right, Mr. Miller?
General George McClellan has my vote in the next election.
But Jefferson Davis isn't the president of the Democratic Party, is he?
Well, there's no president of the Democratic Party, so no.
He's not running in this upcoming election, is he?
No, General George McClellan is, and I believe he will win.
In fact, Jefferson Davis is the president of the Confederate States of America. Isn't that true?
I believe so, yes.
And this Confederacy is fighting a war against our Union right now. Isn't that true as well?
Unfortunately, I do not agree with his war.
You fought in the war, correct?
For the Union Army, I did.
And after leaving, you returned to Howdy County. Isn't that true?
As I said, my uncle had died, he had left the farm for me, so I returned to Howdy County.
You then found out about the Order of the Sons of Liberty, correct?
They were a political organization, and they agreed with me.
I'm sorry, Mr. Miller, I just want to know if that's when you found out about them.
Oh, yes, that's what I heard of them, yes.
And you didn't hesitate to join the order, did you?
No, I love politics, and that's what they were all about.
In fact, as you testified under Rag, you became a leading member, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And due to your time in the Army, you've been given the title of General. Isn't that true as well?
Well, I don't know if it was a title, it was more of a joke. See, I'm the only one of the members of the Order of the Sons of Liberty that have been in military service, so they thought it was something to joke about.
So the members call you that, correct?
Yes, because I walk around with a cane, as you can see.
And General's a military term, isn't it, Mr. Miller?
Yes, it is.
And this is an example of the military talk in the order. Isn't that true?
No, man, this is an example of the humor of the Order. See, we're good-natured people here.
Mr. Miller, this is an example of the military talk in the order. Isn't that true?
No, I believe it's not true. There's not much military talk in the Order.
Mr. Miller, do you remember getting a witness statement?
Yes, I do.
And were you truthful when you gave this statement?
Of course I was.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Let the record reflect that I am referring to, let's see here. I believe it's the top of page 18 in Mr. Miller's deposition. Yeah, here it is. The present counsel, top of page 18. Now, this is here where it talks about the title of General is bestowed upon you. In fact, someone in a more natural position for the order bestowed the title of General upon me because of my efforts. Although I'm sure in part it was a little jab at my time on the front lines. All this military talk scares me though, and I've heard some fantastic tales. Correct?
Yes, but the general thing was not really military.
This military talk scared me, correct?
Yes, I was going to the fantastic tale thing.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Some members in the order want to go for marching and drilling, as you testified under Rect. Isn't that true?
Unfortunately, I would not have it as members if it was up to me.
And there's other military schemes suggested within the order, aren't there?
By the extreme members, yeah.
In cooperation with John Hunt Morgan, though. Isn't that true?
I believe so, which they do not speak on behalf of the entire order. These members are very radical and extreme.
You know these schemes, though, correct?
I've heard them discussed. I don't know them personally.
And John Hunt Morgan is a Confederate general. Isn't that true?
I believe so, a traitor to this country.
Mr. Miller, these plans involve helping free Confederate prisoners of war.
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's question calls for hearsay. Mr. Miller has testified that he has heard these discussed, but then offering, asking about these for the truth of what was stated, call for hearsay, which is.
I'm just asking him, it's with his knowledge, as we've established, that he's a leading member of the order and that he knows of other military schemes. So I feel it's appropriate to ask him about these.
Objection's overruled.
Thank you. Some of these plans involve freeing Confederate prisoners of war. Isn't that true?
Some of this talk they brought up in a meeting sometime. So yes.
And you held a gathering on September 25th, 1864, isn't that correct?
Harvest celebration, celebrate the bounty harvest.
And at this gathering, a lot of folks learned about the order and about what you stood for, correct?
Political order, we talked about a vote secured for General McClellan.
May I approach the witness
You
room?
may.
I'm going to refer again to this flyer.
Oh, yes.
Now, you put out this flyer about the harvest celebration, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And it says, those who love liberty and freedom and want to see an end to this war meet in the horse barn. Isn't that correct?
Yes, we're going to meet there for a swig and a smoke.
And you went to the horse barn, didn't you?
Actually, not really. I stopped by as there was some political talk. I answered the question.
You talked about an end to this war, didn't you? This discussion took place at your gathering.
Well, I talked to Dr. Bowles.
And in fact, you addressed the gathering, didn't you?
No, I talked to Dr. Bowles. He asked me what I learned at the Democratic National Convention.
But you're aware that there were a good number of people listening to you, aren't you, Mr. Miller?
Well, there are a good number of people listening. You know, there are a good number of people walking around the farm, and as I own the farm, they were listening to what I had to say.
Well, Mr. Miller, may I want to name the first?
You may.
This is a gun shipment receipt.
Objection, Your Honor. This document is hearsay as it is a statement made by an out-of-court party in pursuit of the truth of the matter stated, and the party is not available for examination.
Your Honor, if I'm going to respond, this is a stipulated exhibit. This is not hearsay.
Well, you may examine from it.
Thank you.
Object to rule.
Now, here on this gun shipment receipt, it says, shipped to...
Sorry, did you say gunship?
Yes, this is a gun shipment receipt. I'm just going to ask you a few questions about it.
Okay, certainly.
You can see it, okay, correct?
Yes,
Sorry,
ma'am.
President Counsel, I'll let you see as well.
Oh, I can't see it that well.
I'm sorry. Now, here it says the Miller Farm, correct? On this gun shipment receipt?
Is that my farm?
The Miller Farm. That's what it said. That's all I'm asking you, Mr. Miller. It says the Miller
I
Farm.
believe it says that, yes, but
And referring back to the flyer you sent out about your gathering, this also says come to the Miller Farm, doesn't it?
my farm, yes, ma'am.
And referring back to the gun shipment receipt here, it says delivered to Salmon's Lane, Howdy County, Ohio. Isn't that
Is
true?
that my farm?
That's what it says there, doesn't it?
There were gunships in my farm.
And here on your flyer, it also says Salmon's Lane, doesn't it?
Yes, that's my farm, man.
And back on your gun shipment receipt, it says here paid September 25th, 1864, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, ma'am, but that was gunship. Did not know there were gunships there.
And back on your flyer, it says September 25th, doesn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
So 2,800 guns were delivered to your farm that day, weren't they, Mr. Miller?
Apparently, that is condemnable. I do not believe someone would do that.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reedberg.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark Joseph, do you wish to redirect?
I do, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Miller, opposing counsel made reference to the shipment of guns. Were you aware in any way of this shipment?
This is the first time I've heard of it. This is preposterous. I cannot imagine. Oh, there were guns on my farm. This is a harvest celebration. Whoever brought guns, I would never allow them on my farm again.
Your Honor, permission to approach the witness.
You may.
Let the record reflect that I have shown opposing counsel an unmarked copy of what has been previously stipulated as Exhibit C.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Miller, there were in fact guns delivered to your farm. This is the paid receipt for that. However, do you see a date of delivery anywhere on that receipt?
No, I do not.
And on the bill of lading, which opposing counsel handed you, I believe
Oh,
it's
yes.
Exhibit B.
That this thing? This one, sir?
Yes. Do you see a stipulated date of delivery for the shipment of these arms anywhere on there?
No, I do not.
So, would you agree with me that whoever shipped these arms certainly couldn't have known that they would arrive on the 25th?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation?
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
We have just established that there's no stipulated date of delivery on either the bill of lading or the paid receipt. Hence, it's simply a reasonable extrapolation from these facts that if no date of delivery
I'm
is
going to
stipulated.
sustain the objection. You may wish to restate your question, but
Yes, Your Honor.
objection
Thank you.
sustained.
Mr. Miller, could you, as a reasonable, intelligent individual, tell what day these guns were supposed to be delivered, simply from the information on these documents?
Objection, Your Honor. I don't believe counsel has rephrased his question to avoid a speculation.
Counsel?
I believe I have. I'm not asking him for speculation. I'm asking if he would know if he could tell or not.
Objection overruled.
So, do you think you could, Mr.?
No, I can't. I don't know where to say that.
All right. And just to reiterate, you had no knowledge of this, did you?
Not at all. This is the first time I've heard it.
And in fact, you mentioned earlier that there's not much military talk in the Sons of Liberty, but it nonetheless scares you, right?
Yes, it's
Objection, Your Honor, this is a leading question, this is a reading right.
Pardon me, I'll rephrase, Your Honor.
Yes.
Are you scared by the nonetheless small amount of military talk that you hear?
most certainly. See, I'm a proponent for peace, and any military talk scares me.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Ms. Duesenberg, do you wish to recross?
Yes. Mr. Miller, just referring to Exhibit C again, if you could pick that up, please.
No, yes, that's, which one?
That's the shipment receipt on the top there. You got
Oh,
it.
yes, ma'am.
And now it says paid for September 25th, 1864, doesn't it?
Where would I find that?
May I first witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Well, it says paid for September 25th,
Oh, yes.
1864 right there, doesn't it?
It's on the paid receipt, so apparently, yes.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Thanks for coming to testify. You may step down. Mr. Butler, do you have a second witness?
Yes, Your Honor, the petitioner calls Benjamin Thackeray to the stand.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Thackeray. Could you please state your name for the record?
My name is Benjamin J. Thacker.
And Mr. Thackeray, what is your occupation?
Well, I'm a farmer in Howard County, Ohio.
Do you know the petitioner, Landon Miller?
I do. He owns a farm about half mile from my own, as the crow flies.
So you two are neighbors.
We are. I've known Landon since he inherited Charlie Miller's farm.
Now, have you ever been a member of the Sons of Liberty?
Why, yes. 2 or 3 years ago, I joined the Sons of Liberty because I believe they were sympathetic to the needs of a farmer like myself.
Let me ask you a few questions about this group. Do you have an understanding of the Sons of Liberty's purposes and goals?
I believe I do understand their purposes and goals.
And to your understanding, what is the purpose to the Sons of Liberty?
Well, that's easy enough. The purpose of the Sons of Liberty is to bring the Democrats together in order to defeat the Republicans in the upcoming election.
Did the Sons of Liberty have any military purpose?
Well, you hear that sort of talk cooked up just to scare people. But the thing is, it's just not true.
Did the Sons of Liberty provide arms or any other weapons to lead an attack on the Union?
Absolutely not.
Objection, Your Honor. I move for that to be stricken. That's speculation.
Counsel?
Being a member of the Sons of Liberty, I'm sure Mr. Thackeray could testify to whether or not they did provide weapons to lead an attack against the Union.
Objection overruled.
Thank you.
Again, let me ask the question again. Did the Sons of Liberty provide any arms or other weapons to lead an attack on the Union?
Certainly not. That would go against our stated goals of simply bringing the Democrats together.
Are you still a member of the Sons of Liberty?
I am. However, in recent months, I've had to stop attending meetings to work full-time on my farm. It's paid off, though.
Why did you have to stop going to the meetings, sir?
Well, again, it was because I had to work so hard on my farm because of different conditions, but it's paid off.
What about Mr. Miller? Is he involved in his farm?
Well, he is indeed. We, my family and I, have seen Landon take on the challenge of keeping Charlie Miller's farm producing. He's done a great job.
Objection, Your Honor. I move for that to be stricken. That's speculation.
Counsel?
We have established that Mr. Thackeray is both a neighbor of Mr. Miller. He only lives a half mile away, and he has known him. He has developed a relationship. So I think he'd definitely be able to testify whether or not Mr. Miller was involved in his farm being his neighbor.
Objection overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to ask you some questions regarding a gathering on Mr. Miller's farm on September 25th.
All right.
First of all, did you attend this gathering?
I did attend.
And were there many people there?
Oh, there were people from all over. I myself took my wife and family along with me.
What kind of a gathering was it?
Well, it was a picnic to celebrate the bountiful harvest.
What did you hear discussed?
Well, obviously, all sorts of different people were discussing all sorts of different things. I heard people discussing plans for next year's crops and discussing the upcoming local and national elections.
Objection, Your Honor. I move for that testimony to be stricken. That's hearsay.
Your Honor, I am not arguing with the truth of the matter stated. I'm just saying what it said.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Was there any political discussion?
Well, yes, there was. Because the election was in a few weeks, people were discussing the upcoming local and national elections, saying their different views.
Did you hear Mr. Miller say anything of political nature?
Well, I did. I heard him say that he supported Democrats and that the Republicans had a lack of vision. He also said that he supported the peace plan of the Democratic platform.
Objection, Your Honor. I move for that testimony to be stricken as hearsay. It's an out-of-court statement offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted, and it is not against Landon Miller's interest.
If I may respond, because Landon Miller is in the courtroom, any question involving what he did say at this gathering is admissible.
Objections overruled.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Was there any talk of overthrowing the government?
You have to understand, I had my family with me at this gathering. I would never let them listen to that rebellious nonsense.
Just one last question, Mr. Thackeray. Have you ever seen Mr. Miller do anything, or heard him say anything, that would make you question his patriotism?
Absolutely not.
Objection, Your Honor. That is opinion.
Again, we have already established that Mr. Thackeray was his neighbor, and he was present at a gathering on September 25th on Miller's farm. He would absolutely be able to testify whether he has seen anything involving Mr. Miller to make him question his
I think the
patriotism.
question was, has he heard him say anything, and that objection overruled. Testimony heard him say
Thank you.
anything.
Would you like to question repeated?
No, I've never seen anything to make me question Landon's patriotism.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thackeray. No further questions asked.
Mr. Wright, stop exam.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Thackeray, you've lost touch with the Sons of Liberty, haven't you?
I have stopped attending their meetings over the past few months.
So you don't know the Sons of Liberty are passing out arms to the Confederacy, do you?
That would certainly go against everything I know about the Sons of Liberty.
You don't know if they're supporting the Confederacy, do you?
I certainly don't believe that they are. I don't have any information to suggest that they are.
Well, Mr. Thackeray, you haven't been to any meetings, have you?
Over the past few months, I've not. Yes, I've not.
Mr. Thackeray, your neighbors with Mr. Miller, correct, as you stated on the record? And your farm's only about half a mile away, right?
That is correct.
You knew his uncle, Charlie Miller, didn't you?
Yes, Charlie was a reserve gentleman.
And you and Landon, you're both farmers, aren't you?
We are.
And Mr. Miller, he understands what being a farmer is all about, doesn't he, Mr. Thackeray?
I believe that he does.
And the Republicans, they don't understand what being a farmer is all about, now do they?
It doesn't seem that they do.
And you're a Democrat, right?
I do agree with most of the positions of the Democratic Party.
And Mr. Miller, he's a Democrat also, isn't he?
Certainly from what he said, he sounded like a supporter of the Democrats.
And you're aware that the Republican administration of the government has charged Mr. Miller, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Now, you were in the Sons of Liberty, as you stated, correct?
Yes, I was.
And Mr. Miller, he's in the Sons of Liberty, isn't he?
I believe that he was, yes.
And you're here today testifying on behalf of Mr. Miller, correct?
Yes, because he committed no crime.
Mr. Thackeray, you would lie to get your friend and fellow Democrat out of jail, wouldn't you?
I would never lie to get anyone out of jail.
Well, you went to the gathering, didn't you, at the Miller farm?
I did go to the gathering.
And you heard Mr. Miller speak, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you heard this whole speech, didn't you?
I did hear the entire speech.
And you just told us you wouldn't lie, right?
That is correct.
Well, you must have heard Landon Miller say to resist the war, didn't you?
I heard him say nothing of the sort. I heard him say he supported the Democrats and supported the peace plan.
Well, and you heard him say to resist the army, didn't you?
Again, I heard him say no such thing.
To resist the draft, Mr. Thackeray?
I heard him say nothing of resistance to the war, army, or draft.
Well, you certainly must have heard him say, God bless Jefferson Davis, the leader of the Southern Rebellion.
No, I did not.
Mr. Thackeray, it seems that your selective memory has allowed you to pick and choose what to tell this court, hasn't it?
No, I believe I remembered everything that he said. He simply didn't say those things.
Mr. Thackeray, the simple fact is that you don't remember anything. That doesn't help your friend Landon Miller, isn't it?
I remember what happened, whether or not that helps
I have
him or
no
not,
further
it doesn't
questions,
affect
Your Honor.
anything.
Mr. Ready, Mr. Butler?
Yes, Your Honor, just one question. Mr. Zachary, does your relationship to Mr. Miller affect the truthfulness or untruthfulness of the statement you're giving here today?
Absolutely not. I'm telling the truth today.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Ready, recross?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Zachary. Thank you for coming to testify. You may step down. Mr. Ready, you may call your first witness.
The respondent calls Mr. JJ Bingham to the stand.
Yes, can you, Mr. Witness, can you please put your chair back a little? Mr. Bingham? So all the judges can see the. Thank you.
Could you please state your name for the court?
My name is JJ Bingham.
And where do you live, Mr. Bingham?
I currently reside in Howdy County, Ohio.
Is that where you're originally from?
No, sir. For the first 15 years of my life, I lived in the great Commonwealth of Kentucky.
What is your occupation here in Howdy County?
Well, I'm the owner, editor, and reporter for the Howdy County Weekly Press, the local newspaper.
How did you come to obtain this position?
Well, I took an interest in journalism back when I was in school, and the current owner of the paper at the time helped me fund this education. So when he decided to retire, he sold the paper to me.
What are your duties as the owner and editor?
Well, I have to be deeply involved in the community to get out and get my stories. So I spend a lot of time working with people in the community and getting to know them and getting to know the stories.
Mr. Bingham, how has this Civil War affected the community of Howdy County?
As I'm sure it's affected many other counties, it's taken a hard toll. Hundreds of boys and men from the area went out to fight. Some aren't going to come home. But this county fully supports our country and its efforts in this war.
Do you have a political affiliation, Mr. Bingham?
Yes, sir. I'm a member of the Democratic Party.
What have you done as a member of the Democratic Party?
Well, back in 1860, that year I went to 2 Democratic national conventions, the one in Baltimore and Charleston, and I campaigned locally. And this past year, for this election, that's what I focused more on. I didn't go to the convention. I focused on getting the word out around this area about the Democratic nominee, Joe Georgia Club.
Do you know the petitioner?
Yes, I do.
Could you please point him out for me?
He's sitting right over there in the ground check.
I'd like the record to reflect the identification of the petitioner.
You will?
Now, Mr. Bingham, how did you meet Mr. Miller?
Well, whenever anybody new comes into the county, I like to get together with them and interview them and do a little story about them from my paper. That way people just get to know him before they might meet him in person or something. That's how I met Mr. Miller.
And how are you and the petitioner similar?
Well, we're both similar in that we're both from Kentucky. Mr. Miller's a Kentuckian through and through. And we're also similar in that we both members of the Democratic Party.
Your Honor, may I have first witness?
May.
Let the record reflect I'm referring to Exhibit A. Mr. Bingham, you know what this is?
Yeah, this is the flyer that Mr. Miller posted to advertise his little gathering.
And did you attend this gathering?
Yes, not only did I see this flyer and make plans with my family to attend, but Mr. Miller also personally invited me a couple days before this gathering took place.
What happened at the gathering?
Well, it was a beautiful day, and so a large turnout occurred. Many people were there from all over the county, and it started off as a normal party, you know. There were kids playing, and people eating food, dancing, and having a good time. But towards night, it kind of started to turn a little, and as gentlemen gathered in the horse barn.
The horse barn. What happened in the horse barn at the end of the evening?
Well, in the horse barn, like I said, it was the gentlemen had gathered, and in the horse barn, they began to discuss certain ideas.
What ideas were discussed, Mr. Bingham?
Well, they started off to talk about the Democratic Party, and that's where Landon Miller became involved. He spoke briefly about what he had learned about the Democratic Party convention for a short period of time.
Did Mr. Miller say anything else?
Well, as he finished his comments on the Democratic Party, he did say other things about that were not related to this Democratic Party.
What kind of things, Mr. Bingham?
Well, he stood up on his hay bale, and he began to get increasingly agitated, and his remarks were more inflammatory and had more passion in them. He stood up on his hay bale, and as the crowd began pay more attention and focus on him, he began to become more excited. And while he was on his hay bale, he started waving his arms, and he started shouting louder and louder, becoming more flamboyant with his motions as he became more vocal. And his comments started with stuff like, the economic and property rights of the American people shouldn't be allowed to be taken away by the government, and that something had to be done to stop President Lincoln and his administration.
Did that man make those comments?
Yeah, that is the man that made those comments.
What did you do following Mr. Miller's speech?
Well, by the reaction of the crowd and the way they were getting into it, I immediately felt scared for my own life and life to my family members. So I found my family, I gathered them up, and we left that farm immediately.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Okay, Mr. Joseph Clark, do you wish to cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bingham. Now, you say that the men congregated in the barn as the afternoon turned to evening, correct?
That is correct. There was a gathering of men and soldiers.
And the purpose of this congregation was for a swig and a smoke, correct?
Yeah, some of the men did go there to smoke a cigar or
The
whatever.
purpose of this congregation was for a swig and a smoke,
Some of
correct?
the gentlemen did gather there for that reason.
And in this context, there began a general discussion of local politics and the upcoming presidential elections, correct?
At first, yeah, a couple of the people that went to the barn did begin this discussion, and various others joined in.
And it was in the context of this general discussion that Mr. Miller spoke, was it not?
That was, yeah, this conversation, among others, was his pretext for beginning on his speech.
It was in the context of this discussion that Mr. Miller spoke, correct?
Mr. Miller did speak about the Democratic Party briefly while
Please, yes or no? Mr.
Objection, Your
Bingham?
Honor. Please allow the witness to finish.
The witness was instructed to answer the question that's posed by counsel and not to expand on your answer.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Miller's statements were made in the context of this discussion of other local politics and upcoming presidential elections, correct?
Oh yes, he did speak in that context about the Democratic Party.
Now, at the time of Mr. Miller's celebration, you were unaware of the Sons of Liberty, correct?
Yeah, I was unaware of the organization at that time.
And you were also unaware at that time of Mr. Miller's involvement in the organization, correct?
At that time, I was unaware of the board itself, and so yes, I was unaware of Mr. Miller being in it.
Now, but sir, you say you were concerned that your friendship with Mr. Miller and your continued presence at the gathering, among other things, might result in a loss of circulation for your paper, correct?
I was very scared of that because I did not want to be associated with the treasonous remarks of Mr. Miller. If the government would crack down on him, I feared they might
But-
crack down on me for being with them.
Mr. Bingham, you're also worried about a loss of circulation, correct? In your
Yes,
paper?
through association with treasonous remarks Mr. Miller said.
Yes. And so presumably if association with Mr. Miller would cause your loss of circulation, then the general sentiment in Howdy County, even if it's pro-Democrat perhaps, is fairly moderate, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. This is speculation. This calls for speculation.
Counsel?
Your Honor, I believe Mr. Bingham, as is both witnessing these facts and being an editor of the Howdy County Press, being deeply aware of the goings-on in Howdy County, can testify to this.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
Okay.
Mr. Bingham cannot testify to the opinions of all of Howdy County or the sentiments on the board.
Please state the question, counsel.
I said, so presumably the general sentiment in Howdy County, if it is pro-Democrat, is fairly moderate, correct? Your Honor, if I may add one thing on. On direct, Mr. Bingham testified to the general feel of the gathering. I believe he can testify more accurately to the general context of the
Objection overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So presumably the general sentiment in Howdy County is, if perhaps pro-Democrat, fairly moderate, correct?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by moderate in that text.
That's fine. But if the people of Howdy County would be upset by radical ideas, then they certainly wouldn't act on them, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, this calls for speculation.
Your Honor, on the same grounds that I believe Mr. Bingham had the requisite knowledge to answer the previous question, he also has the requisite knowledge to answer this question.
I'll allow the question, but you're getting very close to questions that I would not allow, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Can you repeat the question?
Certainly. So if the people of Howdy County would be upset by radical ideas, then they certainly wouldn't act upon them, correct?
I'm not sure if people would be so much upset by the ideas, seeing as in
But
Howdy County there are...
you're not answering my question, sir. If they would be upset, then they certainly wouldn't act upon such ideas that would upset them, correct?
There are many members in our community who would act on ideas. They're members of the Order of the Sons of Liberty.
But the general community who would be upset by radical ideas would not act on the radical ideas that upset them, correct?
I'm not
Yes
really
or
sure
no,
why the
please.
community would be upset with radical ideas if they're perhaps peaceful in nature.
All right. Now, another matter. If being associated with Mr. Miller could hurt your business, then coming here today and testifying against Mr. Miller, thereby distancing yourself from him, could potentially be of some tangible benefit to you or your business, couldn't it?
Objection, Your Honor, this calls for speculation.
Your Honor, this goes directly to the witness's bias. If he believes that this could be, could materially affect his business, that
Objection.
Your Honor.
Thank you for your question.
certainly, if being associated with Mr. Miller could hurt your business, then coming here today and testifying against Mr. Miller, thereby distancing yourself from him, might be of some tangible benefit to you, correct?
No, I don't see how that could occur, sir.
All right. But you say that you were concerned that your friendship with Mr. Miller might result in the government closing your paper, correct?
Yes, I was very concerned with this because everybody knew what had happened to Clem Lanningham, a member of the Order similar to Mr. Miller.
Thank you. And so,
Objection, Your Honor, please allow my witness to finish.
Again, the witness has gone beyond the answer to the question, so you've got, you know, no.
I'll
No,
just-
I will tell you. I'm going to remind you again, Mr. Bingham, that when counsel asks you a question on cross-examination, you need to try to confine your answer to the question rather than expanding on the pending.
Sorry, I was just trying to get an explanation.
I understand. You're not used to this, so I understand.
Thank you.
and so, given this possibility of the government closing down your business, of which you were afraid, testifying for the government today, thereby, again, distancing yourself from Mr. Miller, minimizes this possibility, doesn't it?
Could you repeat that question? It's kind of long.
Certainly. Because you're concerned that your friendship with Mr. Miller could result in the government shutting down your paper, then by testifying for the government today, thereby distancing yourself from Mr. Miller, you minimize the possibility of the government shutting down your business, correct?
I'm not sure what the government's going to do with their actions, sir. All I know is I wish to tell the truth tonight about Mr. Miller's treason statements in that correspondence.
Now, you have brought up that there was talk of cells and secret societies and conspiracies that you've heard, correct?
Yeah, I was able to...
However, in your reporting, you've never been able to establish that there's any veracity to these things at all, have you?
I was able to report that the government had learned the secret cell.
Your Honor, I'd like to move that be stricken as hearsay.
It's stricken.
Thank you. So, once again, sir, you were never able to establish the veracity of any rumors concerning cells, secret societies, or conspiracies,
I
correct?
had reported in my writings that the government had informed the community of cells.
Your Honor, I move once again that be stricken and ask that the court instruct the witness to answer my question yes or no.
Counsel?
Your Honor, if I respond, I believe that Mr. Bingham was allowed to testify to this. It explains the reason for his answer.
Yeah, he can, I'll let him explain a little.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Bingham, yes or no, you could or could not establish any veracity to the talk of cells, secret societies, and conspiracies that you heard.
I did report my paper
But-
on the cells, secret cells that the government.
That's not what I asked you. You could not establish the veracity of these rumors, correct?
What do you mean by veracity,
The
sir?
truth of these rumors, correct?
I reported merely on what government thought.
But you weren't sure whether or not it was true, correct?
I just report the facts as I'm given.
All right. Now, you mentioned that in your deposition that the federal courthouse caught fire on October 1st, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, this is improper use of the witness statement.
I don't believe there are any rules against using the witness statement in this manner, Your Honor. These are pertinent facts which Mr. Bingham testified to during his deposition.
Your Honor.
During the mock.
I'm sorry.
And under mock trial rules, I'm not limited to in cross what opposing counsel brought up in direct.
Do you wish to be more explicit on what it is in the statement that it was?
I believe he's allowed the question. I'm just asking that the court signal to him to use the deposition if Mr. Bingham testifies to things contradictory to this kind of a statement, not just to ask questions from. That's all I'm asking, Your Honor.
So, well, Mr. Miller, there was a fire at the federal courthouse on October 1st, correct?
That is correct, sir.
And the cause of this fire was officially determined to be unknown, correct?
That is correct, sir.
And in any case, this fire did not destroy the courthouse, did it?
It destroyed parts of the courthouse.
But it,
not the whole.
and in fact, the courthouse was reopened and ready for use on October 22nd, correct?
Yes, it was reopened on the 27th.
So just to clarify things, Mr. Miller's hearing before the military tribunal was held on October 24th. It was 2 days before this, on the 22nd, that the courthouse reopened. Is that
Well,
correct?
the only fact in there I know is, yes, the courthouse was open on the 27th. Mr. Miller's trial.
Certainly. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Reddy, do you wish to redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. Thank you for coming to testify. You step down. Reasonberg, you wish to call your second witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The respondent calls FD Stiger to the stand, please.
Okay.
Could you please state your name for the court?
My name is Felix D. Stiger.
Where do you live, Ms. Stiger?
I live in Hattie County, Ohio.
Have you lived there your whole life?
No, I used to live in Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky.
What did you do when you lived in Kentucky?
I had a job, I ran dogs and captured fugitive slaves.
And why did you leave Kentucky?
I left because of all the talk of secession there, and because of the way I was treated by my former employees. After being out nights on end, catching these slaves, doing these people a favor, they would throw their money at me and disrespected me, so I left.
What is your occupation now, Ms. Stiger?
Currently, I'm a special officer for the Union Army.
How did you attain this position?
General Burnside had caught wind of my skills as a tracker and said I would be good for this job.
What were you assigned to do once you had this position?
My first task was to infiltrate the Society of the Sons of Liberty and find out the treasonous actions going on.
Could you please tell the court a little bit about the Sons of Liberty?
Sons of Liberty is a treasonous organization. They preach at every spot they can get a listener, whether it be a church or a railroad. He already had knowledge of them blowing up a harbor in Louisville, Kentucky, and
Objection, Your Honor.
conspires.
I like this testimony stricken on the basis of hearsay. Everything she is testifying to was told to her by General Burnside.
Your Honor, can I respond? This is not offered for the truth of the matter asserted. I'm simply establishing that she, as we've already established, as a special officer for the Union, has knowledge before infiltrating the Sons of Liberty.
The objection overruled.
Thank you. Could you tell the court about the Sons of Liberty?
Yes, not only do they preach treason anywhere they can, they could blow up a harbor in Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm from, and they also have been known to conspire with Confederate generals. Not the Union
And Ms. Stiger, how did you go about fulfilling your mission?
Well, it was very secretive, this society was, and I
recall a Sons of Liberty meeting mid-June of 1864?
Yes, I do. It was either the 13th or it was either the 14th or the 15th, and that was the meeting that they addressed Mr. Coffin. He, like myself, was a government agent who had worked his way onto this society.
Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant. Mr. Coffin has nothing to do with the treasonous actions committed by Mr. Miller.
You're not going to respond. We've already established throughout this case that Mr. Miller is a member of the Sons of Liberty. Ms. Stiger is here to testify to the nature of this organization. These members of this organization were at his gathering. This is all relevant to the case.
Yeah, objection to rule.
Thank you. Mr.
Well, at this meeting, Mr. Coffin, like myself, government agent, worked his way onto the Sons of Liberty. He had been found out, and because he was a danger to the plan, Mr. Dodd, I believe it was to go down to Hamilton and dispose of him.
Who did you meet that were members of the Sons of Liberty?
Mr. Dodd, Judge Bowles, Mr. Vallandigham, Mr. Clem Vallandigham, and the petitioner, Mr. Manzano.
Who had high-ranking positions?
That would be Mr. Miller and Mr. Vallandigham.
Did you attend the Democratic Convention?
Yes, I did.
And what happened there?
Well, at this convention, I was snooping around in some of the backgrounds, and I came across the Sons of Liberty meeting going on. And I walked in right when Mr. Miller was speaking, addressing everybody. And he was telling everyone to resist the draft and to stop paying taxes. And then he referred to our president, Mr. Lincoln, as the folly of the original baboon in the White House.
Ms. Stiger, you mentioned before that Mr. Vallandigham was also a high-ranking official. What were his duties?
He was to give
Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Blenningsham's duties have no relevance to the case at hand.
Your Honor, if I may respond, for the same reason before, all this information about the Sons of Liberty is definitely relevant to this case.
You may proceed so long as you can tie in the relevance.
Thank you. What were Mr. Vallandigham's duties?
He was to give the signal for the great uprising. This was when the Sons of Liberty were going to form a Northwest Confederacy in line with the Southern Confederacy, which was already succeeded, and then together they would overthrow the Union.
Ms. Stiger, did you attend Mr. Miller's gathering on September 25th, 1864?
Yes, I did.
May I approach the witness, Your
You
Honor?
may.
Thank you, Ms. Stiger. Now, are you familiar with this exhibit?
Yes, this is one of the flyers Miller put up to advertise his anti-war rally he had in the horse barn.
Did you go to the horse barn that evening?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And did Mr. Miller go to the horse barn?
Yes, he did.
And can you describe for the court what Mr. Miller did once in the horse barn?
Well, once in the horse barn, he started talking a little bit about the Democratic Party and its strengths and weaknesses and stuff. But then, as people started gathering, paying more attention to him, he got really angry, flamboyant, and he addressed everyone saying that the war had been abandoned to save the Union and begun to serve all negritude, and we had no duty in fighting it. And then he jumped upon a hay bale and yelled, "Resist the draft, resist the army, resist Lincoln, and God bless Jefferson Davis."
Can you please instruct the witness to sit down?
I'm sorry. I asked you to describe what she really wanted to describe what Mr. Miller did.
Normally, you have some discretion allowing witnesses. Usually, witnesses would not stand to do that in a courtroom, but
So I just got, it
Yeah.
just really touched me, sir.
sure.
Ms. Stiger, is the man who made those comments in the courtroom this afternoon?
Yes, he is. Mr. Lyman Miller, in the brown suit coat, sitting right there.
Let the record reflect the identification of the petitioner, Mr. Lyman Miller. Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Butland, you want to cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Stiger. Let's first talk about what you did before you became a paid informant. You used your dogs and your tracking skills to capture escaped slaves and return them to their masters, as you testified on direct.
I think that was my first occupation, yes.
Now, you don't like Southerners and Confederates, do you?
I'm really for the Union, and I do not like those who succeed.
So you don't like Southerners and Confederates, do you?
That's correct.
Thank you. You also testified that you didn't like the way that the masters of the slaves treated you when you returned their slaves to them. You said they treated you like dirt, throwing their money at you like they didn't want to come in contact with you, correct?
Very disrespectful, very.
In fact, you'd like to call them the lordly princes of the South. Isn't that right?
That's what they are.
In fact, you think in the olden days they would have had their heads chopped off. Isn't that correct?
That was a punishment for treason back in the olden days.
Now, you were put on the payroll for the Union Army to infiltrate the Sons of Liberty and report back to General Burnside about your findings, correct?
Yes, that was my duty. That was my job.
And so you became a paid informant.
I became a paid special officer.
But you informed General Burnside about what you found at the meetings.
I worked in intelligence, yes.
Thank you. But what General Burnside actually paid you to do was to gather evidence to prove what the two of you thought you already knew, that the Sons of Liberty were traitors, pure and simple, correct?
I had to prove that they already had information. The Union Army had some information of them being treasonous, but they needed cold, hard evidence, and that was my job, to gather this evidence.
But what you needed the evidence for was to prove what the two of you already knew, that the Sons of Liberty were traitors, pure and simple,
Objection,
correct?
Your Honor. This question has been asked and answered.
She did not answer my question, Your Honor.
If you can re-ask the question.
Would you like to be re-asked?
Answer.
The evidence was needed to prove what you two thought you already knew, that the Sons of Liberty were traitors, pure and simple, correct?
I already knew this, but not everyone else did, and I was going to find the evidence to prove to everyone that...
And General Burnside also knew that the Sons of Liberty were traitors, correct?
I can't testify. I don't know if that's how he felt. I don't know.
Thank you. You think that they're all traitors, right?
Who's all?
The Sons of Liberty and how you refer to them as the Lords and Ladies of the South, you think that they're all traitors, don't you?
Pretty much.
Now, you thought the members of the Sons of Liberty were just cowards hiding on the underbelly of the Democratic Party. Isn't that correct?
That's exactly what they were. I found out that's exactly what they were.
Now, you had another reason for liking what General Burnside asked you to do, and that's because he told you you would have a bright future ahead of you if you found who he was looking for, correct?
I did not do this because of the bright future I was promised.
But in fact, he specifically told you you had a bright future ahead of you.
Yeah, he told me, but that's not why I did it. I did it to protect everything
That's
that
not-
flag stands for.
Excuse me, now,
Justice and freedom.
that's not what I'm asking. He told you you had a bright future ahead of you if you found who he was looking for, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. This question has been asked and answered.
Again, she did not answer my question, Your Honor.
Can you answer the question or not?
Yes, he did tell me that.
Okay.
Thank you. And you're excited about the possibility of working with General Burnside after the war, weren't you?
Oh, it would be great to work and keep my job.
In fact, you thought that if you found the evidence he was looking for, you might even have the possibility of working with President Lincoln, correct?
Objection, relevance?
I'm just trying to show that if she did a good job for this general, she could be willing to testify to anything in here for the Union in order to get a good job.
Yeah, objection overruled.
Would you like the question repeated?
Sure.
You even thought that if you found the evidence that General Burnside was looking for, you might even have the chance to work with President Lincoln, correct?
It would be the dream of almost every American to work side by side with honest Abe.
In fact, you even thought that it would be the dream of a lifetime, correct?
Yeah, it's a dream.
Now, I'd like to see if I can clarify some things that you testified on direct examination. You testified concerning a meeting on the 14th or 15th of June and discussions regarding another paid informant, correct?
Yes, he was killed because he was discovered.
The fact is, Miss, you don't even believe Mr. Miller was present at this meeting, do you?
I don't remember exactly who was there at first.
But you don't believe that Mr. Miller was present at this meeting, do you?
Oh, I do believe he was there. I just don't remember for sure.
Do you remember submitting a deposition prior to this trial?
Yes,
And do you swear to tell the truth in this deposition?
I tell the truth all the time.
May I press the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Let the record reflect and show you unmarked copy of FD Stiger's deposition to opposing counsel. Referring to page 29, or no, actually, you're referring to page 30, the last line of page 30. Please follow along with me, ma'am. I don't think Miller was there at that meeting, but he could have been. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, that's what I just said.
Thank you. Now, you also testified on direct about things you heard at the meetings of the Sons of Liberty, correct?
Yes.
But isn't it a fact, miss, that you cannot say that it was Mr. Miller who said those things?
Yes, he did say those things. I walked into the room and he was yelling them at everyone in the back of the Democratic Convention.
You can testify that it was Mr. Miller who said these things.
Yes.
Again, may I press the witness, Your Honors? I am looking at page 31. Follow along again. One of them told us we were to cooperate with Confederate forces John Hunt worried and making Confederate reports. I heard the same talk in the back room of the convention. That was the first I heard Miller speak.
That's the one I was referring to.
However, we're talking about how Mr. Miller, you cannot say this exactly Mr. Miller, who's talking about joining the forces of Nathan Bedford Forrest and John Hunt Morgan, the schemes that we were talking about.
You didn't clarify that, so I didn't know what you were talking about.
My apologies. You also testified about a gathering at Mr. Miller's farm, correct?
Yes, the anti-war rally.
And you claim it was some sort of meeting for the Sons of Liberty. There were a lot of members there, correct?
There were many members.
And the Sons of Liberty thought that you were part of their organization, correct?
Yes, because I had perceived myself to be as one of them.
Yet the only way you found out about this gathering was through a flyer that was posted around the county, correct?
Flyer talk.
Surely you would agree with me, miss, that if the gathering was intended to be a gathering for many members of the Sons of Liberty, Mr. Miller could have just gotten the word around to the members, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation?
This is a reasonable extrapolation. If the meeting was solely for the members of the Sons of Liberty, you would think that one of the high-ranking officials could have just gotten the word around to the members.
I'll overrule his objection.
Can you repeat the whole question?
If the gathering was intended to be for the members of the Sons of Liberty, Mr. Miller could have just gotten the word around to the members, correct?
He could have just put up a front though too.
Put up a
To
front.
make it look like it was just some innocent country gathering, but really it was this anti-war rally where she tried to suck everyone in the community.
Thank you. Just a few more questions, Ms. Stiger. You told General Burnside what you thought he was looking for, didn't you?
I had concrete evidence of the Miller speech, and I'd also seen some weapons there.
But still, you told General Burnside what you thought he was looking for, correct?
I told them what I knew they were looking for, the treasonous evidence.
Thank you. And he told you you would be rewarded, right?
He did say I would be rewarded, but I haven't since.
Finally, Ms. Stiger, just these questions. Ms. Stiger, you're pretty good at deceiving people, aren't you?
I'm good at deceiving those who I wish to, which were the treasonous people.
You were able to deceive the Sons of Liberty into believing that you wanted to be a member of their group and were sympathetic to their cause, correct?
I was deceiving the Sons of Liberty, but if you're inferring that I do it today in court, I'd tell the truth. I want to work next to Honest Abe Lincoln. I've got to tell the truth in court.
All I'm saying is you are very good at deceiving people. In fact, you were so good at deceiving the Sons of Liberty that you were sincere in your support for their cause that they elected you Secretary of the Grand Council for Kentucky. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, Grand Council. I was pretty good.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Riesenberg, redirect.
Thank you. Mr. Dirt, after leaving Miller's gathering, why did you report to General Burnside?
It was my job. I had all the evidence they needed. I had concrete evidence of weapons. I had concrete evidence of treasonous talk, and I went and told him. That was my job.
Thank you. Other questions?
Mr. Butland, recross?
I don't think that'll be necessary, Your Honor.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Stiger. You may step down. Thanks for coming to testify. present a closing argument?
We do, Your Honor.
You may. You may proceed.
May it please the court, Landon Miller's continued detainment represents a gross breach of the constitutional ideals for which our nation is now fighting so hard. As today's testimony has shown, there have been numerous breaches of Mr. Miller's rights, any one of which alone would taint his incarceration. Mr. Miller's hearing before the military tribunal violated his Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights, while the very charges brought against him violated his First Amendment rights. However, contrary to the claims of the respondent, neither the unusual circumstances of these times, nor the Presidential Proclamation 1862, nor even the Congressional Act of March 3, 1863, can justify these blatant violations of Mr. Miller's rights. There can be no question that Mr. Miller's traditional constitutional rights have been violated by the actions the military has taken against him. Mr. Miller was denied his rights to free speech, due process, trial by jury, and grand jury hearing. The respondent does not deny these claims. Rather, they try to justify them on the grounds of public necessity. However, today's testimony has shown there was no public necessity. The respondent has produced nothing but the biased remarks of JJ Bingham, who openly admitted to publishing in his paper what the government told him, even though he could not establish the veracity of these remarks. The respondent has also based their case upon the baseless, biased accusations of one of their paid informants, FD Stiger. Moreover, we've established today that the federal court in Howdy County was open and running at the time of Mr. Miller's hearing, so there can be argued no need for a military tribunal in that sense. However, even if there are or were unusual circumstances, they cannot justify Mr. Miller's detainment. In respect to his speech, although the limits of free speech may, of necessity, expand and contract in response to prevailing conditions, when Mr. Miller said on September 25th, his response to Dr. Bowles' question was so clearly within the confines of the First Amendment as to be acceptable under all circumstances. But even closer to the heart of this matter, the Supreme Court's ruling in Ex parte Miller clearly dictates that the protections of the Bill of Rights apply even in times of crisis. Wrote Chief Justice Taney of Times of Upheaval, quote, even if the writ of habeas corpus were suspended by an act of Congress and a party were arrested and imprisoned, he could not be kept in prison or brought before a military tribunal because the Sixth Article of the Bill of Rights would still apply. Such trial and detention could be legitimate only under the preposterous supposition that Mr. Miller was a prisoner of war. However, there's been absolutely no evidence that Mr. Miller ever partook in any violent acts, except, of course, fighting for the Union Army. Hence, Mr. Miller cannot be considered an enemy combatant, and therefore cannot be considered a prisoner of war. Now, just as the unusual circumstances which our country now faces cannot justify Mr. Miller's treatment, neither can the Presidential Proclamation of 1862 or the Congressional Act of March 3, 1863. The Presidential Proclamation is blatantly unconstitutional. As Chief Justice Taney explicitly stated in Ex parte Miller, the Constitution provides no ground whatever for supposing that the President may suspend the writ of habeas corpus. Hence, the Congressional Act of 63 was needed to render valid the mandates of the President's proclamation. However, in so doing, the Act necessarily introduced new restrictions upon the government's actions. It calls, in the second and third sections, for the government to present a detainee's case to a grand jury, to turn him over to civil authorities, or to release him. Even in the unlikely event that this retroactive delegation of legislative authority is constitutional, the government must follow it. With Mr. Miller, this was not the case, so this act cannot possibly justify his treatment. In short, today's testimony has shown clearly and convincingly that Mr. Miller's First, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment rights have been violated, and that the military court which tried him had no jurisdiction, and no law or fact can justify these violations.
if we allow the rights and protections guaranteed by the Constitution to become yet another casualty of this great war in which we are now engaged, the entire struggle will have been in vain. So, we respectfully ask that this court grant the petition for writ habeas corpus and order the release of Landon Miller. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark Joseph. Mr. Reddy, do you wish to offer closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
May it please the court. Your Honors, our nation is in a grievous fight for its unity. The ideals that we hold so dear are being threatened. This civil war that we find ourselves entangled in is a question of the future of our nation. As President Lincoln said nearly a year ago at Gettysburg, this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, in that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish. But yet, Your Honors, our nation will perish if we allow rebels and insurgents like the petitioner to live within our borders. We set out to prove the three things set forth by my co-counsel in her opening statement. We have proven all three. The first, Mr. Miller's speech and actions fell well outside his First Amendment rights. Second, the United States military had the jurisdiction to try the petitioner. And third, the United States military had the right to detain the petitioner. Your Honors, Landon Miller is a traitor. The petitioner claims that Miller answered Dr. Bowles one question, but yet recall the testimony of JJ Bingham and Ms. Stiger. Mr. Miller was on a hay bale in the horse barn, preaching to a crowd. Mr. Bingham testified that he was so shocked and taken aback by these comments that he was forced to pack up his family and leave. The remarks were so treasonous that Mr. Bingham feared imprisonment. FD Stiger testified to the nature of the Sons of Liberty, a group that Landon Miller is a high-ranking member of. She testified that the Sons of Liberty engage in rebellious activity and have conspired with Confederate generals. The Ohio Constitution, Article 1, Section 11 states that every citizen may freely speak, write, and publish his sentiments on all subjects, being responsible for the abuse of this right. Your Honors, Landon Miller abused his First Amendment right when he preached resistance of the war and resistance of the Army, and when he praised the leader of the Southern Rebellion. Mr. Miller himself testified that Jefferson Davis is the one statesman he admires above all others. The Constitution goes on to say that one may assemble, but only in a peaceable manner. You heard Mr. Miller testify. There were Sons of Liberty members there. You recall Exhibit C. There were 2,800 guns at the Miller farm that night. 2,800 guns, members of a group that want to overthrow the government, and Mr. Miller on a hay bale telling the crowd to resist the war, resist Lincoln, resist the Army, and God bless Jefferson Davis. Your Honors, that is not peaceable assembly. That is a threat to the safety of this community. The second thing that we have proven is that the United States military had the jurisdiction to try Mr. Miller. Contrary to what the petitioner claims, they had this based on the Presidential Proclamation of 1862, the law of our land. The proclamation states that during the existing rebellion, all rebels and insurgents within the United States who are guilty of discouraging volunteer enlistments or any disloyal practice are subject to trial and punishment by courts both martial or military in commission. Your Honors, Landon Miller opposed the draft, preached resistance of the war, and resistance of the Army. That makes him a traitor, according to the proclamation, therefore subjecting him to martial law. The third thing that we have proven is that the United States military had the right to detain the petitioner. They had this right based on the Proclamation of 1862, which states that during the existing war, as a necessary means for suppressing further rebellion, the United States government has the authority to suspend the writ of habeas corpus in any case throughout the United States. Mr. Miller was charged with inciting a rebellion. Therefore, his detainment was entirely legal. Your Honors, I will remind you that the petitioner had the burden of proof this evening and has failed to prove with clear and convincing evidence that the arrest, trial, and detainment of Mr. Miller were unconstitutional. They were not. The petitioner has received his trial. He has received his due process. We cannot allow our nation to crumble at the hands of those living within our borders. 90 years ago, we fought and we died to carve out a nation of freedom and liberty. Your Honors, remember the 2,800 guns. And remember Mr. Miller's words to the crowd, telling them to resist the war, to resist the army, and to resist President Lincoln. We then responded with respectfully request that you deny the writ of habeas corpus and keep the risk to the safety of our community in prison. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reddick. Mr. Clark Joseph, you have 2 minutes for rebuttal. Do you wish to take it?
Yes.
May it please the court, we, the petitioner, have clearly and convincingly shown that Mr. Miller should be granted the writ of habeas corpus, as requested. The respondent has not truly proved a single one of their counterpoints to our clear and convincing arguments. They have produced nothing but the questionable, biased accusations of their 2 witnesses. Notably, although they've been able to show that guns arrived on Miller's farm, we've established that that could have been pure coincidence. Moreover, Mr. Miller had no knowledge of those guns. More to the point, though, even if Mr. Miller, perhaps as the respondent's witnesses have claimed, exceeded his First Amendment rights, this still does not justify his detainment, for the federal courts were open and running at the time of Mr. Miller's hearing. So the military tribunal necessarily lacked authority. As I mentioned earlier, the Presidential Proclamation of 1862 is blatantly unconstitutional. Hence, the Congressional Act was needed to render valid its mandates. However, the Congressional Act was not followed in this case, so it cannot justify Mr. Miller's treatment. Finally, I should simply reiterate, this case boils down to the straightforward precedent set in Ex parte Merriman, which clearly renders Mr. Miller's continued detainment unconstitutional. To uphold the Constitution, the backbone of that great nation, which our brave soldiers are daily giving their lives, the petitioner once again respectfully asks that this court grant the writ of habeas corpus and order the release of Landon Miller. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark Joseph. The case is submitted to the court. We will be in recess for a short period of time, and we will come back to court and give you our decision.
Thank you.
All rise. The rules provide that counsel are provided this opportunity this time to offer any objections, not obviously to testimony, but any objections or questions about the procedure.
The respondent has no objections, Your Honor.
May we deliberate?
Sure.
Your Honor, the petitioner has no material objections.
Thank you. Well, as always, this is a tremendous pleasure for those of us who had the privilege of judging the two final teams. I can say on behalf of, I know of all of us, each is going to give his comments, observations, and they will give you the awards. The mock trial program is so very, very important because you won't realize it until probably maybe years from now. But it's very, very important because what you have learned is a great deal about our judicial system, the adversary system in particular. You now know more than most citizens in our country know about how the system works, how it functions. And that's a privilege that we hope you will cherish because there can be wonderful ripple effects from, and there have been from others who participated, and those of you who have been in this competition before, particularly advisors and those who have been helping with the program know that you are learning very, very valuable skills, and not just personal skills, obviously, in advocacy and being able to present arguments and all the things that you do in mock trial. But even more important than that is that you have learned about our system of justice, a little bit of it, a piece of it, and we would expect that some of you already have ideas about how it can be better, how it can be made better, how it can be improved, because it can be. For all of our accolades we give ourselves in this country for a very, very strong justice system, it can be better. And so we would hope that you would take the experience that you've had here and those of you who are other team members here, that you would take the experience, use it, not just to say this has been a wonderful experience in high school, but to use it as you become adults to help other citizens understand the system and to improve the system. So I congratulate you for all of the students who've taken the time. This is not easy work. You take a lot of extra time. Obviously, it's not required. You've chosen to use your valuable time to do something that is extremely, extremely beneficial to you and hopefully to the communities in which you will live. So I congratulate all of you on behalf of all of us and all of those who've been participating in the mock trial program at the local level and all the way up, if you will. I commend you for what you've done. I also want to thank, obviously, the OCLRE board. They've been at this for a number of years. We understand Ohio still has the highest number, I think, of schools or participants in mock trial of any state in the country. Your programs list all of the other persons that need to be appropriately acknowledged, but I've been doing this for a number of years, and I'm particularly impressed with the issue, the case that was created for this year's mock trial program. I think it's just an outstanding case because of its historical value, obviously, and because of its symbolism. We recognize that the these issues are timeless, and so I commend those who are responsible, and they're all listed for the case, developing the case. I want to recognize one person who is here, Jim Phillips, who has been doing this, I think, almost as long as I have, Jim. This is his last year on this member of the OCLRE board. Has been a very, very strong supporter of mock trial, and so Jim, thank you. You can come back anytime. That seems like an appropriate place to start with the comments from the judges. Jim, you probably will not get more applause than you did just now for your comments.
Or any other time. I drove here from the west side of town, and I crossed High Street at East North Broadway. There were 400 demonstrators holding up flags saying peace, peace, against the war, all this this other stuff, and I'm driving over here thinking that you're going to be arguing the case you're going to be arguing. And I was wondering, what would happen if somebody grabbed him and put him in jail, and I'm thinking, isn't that an irony that it is such a timeless question, and obviously we read the news and we know about what's going on now, and however you happen to come down on the issues, this is a current issue. There's a guy named Padilla right now who is very much dealing with the same kinds of issues that you dealt with here today. So, who'd have thunk? Likewise, 20 years ago, when a couple of us got together and said we ought to have a mock trial program in Ohio, who'd have thunk? Who'd have thunk that there would be so many teams, and who'd have thunk that the quality of the teams would have evolved to where we saw it today. You'll hear who won and who lost, and somebody has to win and somebody has to lose and all that stuff. It's a computation by score. This much I can tell you, the difference out of some 300 and some points was 2%. So close that it really was quite remarkable. And it was remarkable and close because you guys were great. I judged, actually I saw a couple of kids who were on the teams I judged earlier. I judged 2 rounds previously, and they were great. And you were great. And it really was remarkable. I was especially interested in the cross-examination of the witness Stiger, which from a trial lawyer and criminal defense lawyer's perspective is the most interesting for me. There was so much to cross-examine about, and a good job was done cross-examining. And a tough witness to be, because you're so slimy. So slimy. Such a great job avoiding the slime by being assertive. I started out as a prosecutor, and I was looking at you thinking, you're going to be a tough prosecutor. Lawyers' jobs were excellent. My sympathy, of course, lies on one side of this case, and guess which side. Notwithstanding that, I thought that the prosecution did a wonderful job of representing a position that isn't quite where I come from. On the other hand, you guys stood up for what was right. The witnesses on your side were solid, salt of the earth, great witnesses, and I congratulate all of you on really spectacular jobs. I can't tell you how proud I am of you.
Thank you, Jim. I should say that there is one way in which mock trial program is not similar to real life, and that is that in real life, one judge is not permitted to sit on a trial and then sit on the appellate bench in the same case. So this is how we do it. Steve Chapelier, President of the Ohio State Bar Association.
Thank you, Chief Justice Moyer. I can now tell you the secret as to why the Ohio State Bar Association has been one of the sponsors of the mock trial program for all these years. It's a recruiting tool. We want all of you to join the 25,000 lawyers who are members of the Ohio State Bar Association. The lawyers did a fantastic job. The witnesses did a fantastic job. To me, this was fun. It was drama, and I found myself having to give a little pinch in my side and remind myself, no, you're keeping score here, so pay attention to these things. But I got caught up in the stories that the witnesses were telling, in the advocacy from the lawyers, all obviously very, very well prepared, worked hard, not relying upon notes, eloquent, impassioned. It was a real treat for me to be able to sit here and participate in this process. Thank you for all that you've done here today.
Thank you, Steve. Dan Hilson, who is the chair of the board of OCLRE.
Thank you, Chief. So on behalf of all the board members and the staff, we would like to thank
not just the respondent and the petitioner here, but everybody in the audience, because most of you also have spent numerous hours preparing to get to the state tournament. Anybody who comes to Columbus is a superior team, or you would not be here. That includes the teachers, the mentors, and the parents who have dedicated numerous hours. This is the culmination, this is the final round, but as you can imagine, the staff is going to wipe their brow and go back, and on Monday they're going to start for the very next break, the very next season. This is really a 360 day ongoing mission with OCLRE to prepare for the next case. And it does take an awful lot of time, but I think you've witnessed why everybody's willing to participate at this level. Both teams were very balanced. As my colleagues have indicated, that it was very, very close. I thought the petitioners did a particularly nice job of focusing on the free speech aspect. I mean, that was clearly the heart of your defense, while the respondents focused on the acts of treason, more of the emotional aspect. And I thought both sides did a nice job of that. Mr. Reedy, I thought you were extremely good on your feet. There were a couple of points in time where I was very impressed with your ability to interact with the witnesses and change focus. Ms. Restenberg, I don't know that I've ever seen anybody as poised as you were. Nothing seemed to rattle you. You were extremely poised. Mr. Clark Joseph, I thought you had an extremely good opening. I thought you set the tone for the case. You know, it was Mr. Button was the opening. So I thought you did a nice job of setting the tone for the case. I also thought that your cross of the second witness was your best performance, and you were very good. And Mr. Clark Joseph, it was interesting, when there were objections, a couple times you paused, but you fought through, and your answers were very, very good. I thought you probably did the best of responding on the objections that were raised. When the chief would ask you, okay, what's your comment? You would come back and you notice that you won almost every one. And in fact, you may have won every one. And you were very strong in that. And it just goes to demonstrate that everybody has a little different skill set. And I think you saw that here. I thought Mr. Miller was very, very believable. He really portrayed the part well. If there ever was a scoundrel, we would have never identified him as you. And Ms. Lehman, very impassioned. You portrayed the scoundrel that you are. You did a very good job. I thought the other two witnesses had also a very nice job of trying to spin their tales, and that's what's important for the witnesses. It's to be able to have credibility, and I thought all witnesses did a nice job from that standpoint.
Thanks, Dan. And representing one of the other sponsors of mock trial program, the Attorney General's Office, Travis.
I was one of the people that were on a committee that developed the materials, was involved primarily in writing the briefs and the other materials that were related to this case. It's always kind of curious as to see what will develop when we think of the different arguments that were presented and to see how it's going to come out. And I have to say that I'm very pleased to see what you did with what we provided. The briefs themselves didn't provide you with a lot of application of facts. We wanted to leave you with some more creativity in your own and make the arguments. And I see here today that you did a great job in bringing out the facts and the witness statements and putting together a case. I've judged for about 3 years. I think this is my 3rd year judging these competitions. And every year it seems like the bar is getting higher, and definitely you have raised the bar. I was very impressed on both sides. I'll make some more specific comments. Try not to repeat any that have already been made. Seth, you had a great passion for your argument. I really thought you were an advocate for the government. You really had. You convinced, the way you presented your argument with strong conviction, and it showed. And I think it helped you be a stronger advocate for your case. In the closing arguments, the government made good use of the facts, but had a little bit more law that they could have used for their argument. Then the same thing, it was kind of the reverse
for the petitioners. The petitioners made good use of the law, but there wasn't as much of integration of the facts that you had available. You had some testimony that you were able to get out, but then it didn't quite come all together in the close. You touched on it, but you could have gone a little bit further, but you did a great job in bringing out all the legal arguments, which is what you also want to do in your closing arguments. Both sides did a good job in the opening statements establishing the themes early. On the one hand, it was about self-preservation of the country, public safety was in jeopardy. On the other hand, it's about the protection of all the citizens' rights. You established the theme that Landon Miller was actually a patriot, being unfairly punished. So I thought you did a great job in the openings. Also, with regards to the witnesses, Andy Trafford, who did Mr. Miller, was also very good because he was very natural, and sometimes I use that term. Natural to me means questions asked, there's not even a hesitation when he's answering these questions. It's almost like he doesn't have to think about it, and he did a very good job of naturally responding. He was also an advocate for his position as a witness. He always was seeming to get in the positive sides to his position that the attorney was arguing. And he also was a very likable type of figure, which made me more sympathetic to his cause. Sarah Weimer also did a good job in showing passion for her witness as well, and acted it out. And that also made for a more convincing and entertaining witness as well. So overall, he did a great job.
Thank you, Brett. Dan Hilson mentioned the staff that's going to begin to work on the next question immediately. Deb DeHaan, we didn't introduce Deb DeHaan, who's Executive Director. I wrote to you already, who's back there checking the camera to make sure it's working. Deb, thank you. Like the longest speeches you ever heard, because you didn't come to hear speeches. You came to get trophies and awards and know how you did. We're going to move down off the bench and stand in front of the bench and announcement. The first award is going to be presented by Jim Phillips, and it's for the best witness.
Great witnesses on both sides, different witnesses. I'm not going to drag this out. I will stay after if anybody cares. After the dust settles, I'll be here. Andy Trafford.
An outstanding trial lawyer is prepared, knows the facts, knows the law, handles the objections properly, asks the questions the right way, gives a great argument. The outstanding advocate is Katie Priestman.
Statewide competition is a team that has its first year in the competition at any level, and that your runner-up is Upper Arlington.
winner. I think